$175 million. That is how much money poured into a car company that lasted exactly 21 months before the doors closed, and the dream died on a factory floor in Belfast. John Zachary DeLorean wasn't a nobody. By the time he left General Motors in 1973, he was the youngest division head in the company's history, the man who gave America the Pontiac GTO, a 6'4" engineer with a model wife and a reputation that made investors reach for their checkbooks before he finished his sentence. He was the car industry's rock star, and he knew it. The car he wanted to build was unlike anything on the road. Stainless steel body panels, gull-wing doors that opened straight up like a bird taking flight, a low rear-engine layout. It would be sold at a premium price to buyers who wanted something that announced itself. DeLorean called it the ethical sports car. He meant that it was built to last, built with integrity, built to mean something. The pitch worked on almost everyone who heard it. Funding a new car company from scratch is one of the most expensive things a human being can attempt. You need a factory, tooling, a supply chain, engineers, assembly workers, a dealer network, crash testing, regulatory approvals, and enough working capital to cover the gap between the first bolt turned and the first check cleared. DeLorean needed roughly $200 million to do it right. He raised somewhere around $175 million. That gap between what he had and what he needed would become the crack that swallowed everything. The British government gets a significant piece of this story, and it isn't a flattering piece. In the mid-1970s, Northern Ireland was economically devastated. Unemployment in West Belfast was running above 20%. The troubles had been burning for years, and foreign investment was a distant rumor. When DeLorean walked into negotiations with the Department of Commerce offering to build a factory and employ roughly 2,000 people, the British government didn't ask enough questions. They contributed approximately £77 million of public money, loans and grants and equity stakes, to plant DeLorean's factory in Dunmurry on the outskirts of Belfast. It was a political decision dressed as an economic one. The workers who took those jobs were real. The desperation behind the deal was real, but the financial foundation beneath all of it wasn't. Construction began in 1978. The Dunmurry plant was genuinely impressive in physical terms, a modern facility built to assemble a car that didn't yet exist in production form. The chassis design came from Lotus, which added cost and complexity. The stainless steel body panels required specialized suppliers who had never worked at automotive volume before. Every decision DeLorean made was the expensive one. Every timeline he presented to investors and government officials slipped. The first production cars rolled off the line in January 1981. They were not ready. Early quality issues were serious. Door seals leaked. The V6 engine, sourced from the Peugeot-Renault-Volvo joint venture, was underpowered for the weight of the car. American dealers began receiving vehicles with alignment problems, electrical faults, fit and finish gaps that a $30,000 buyer in 1981 wouldn't accept. DeLorean Motor Company's service costs climbed. Its reputation among early buyers wobbled. The company needed to sell 30,000 cars per year to reach break-even. That wasn't an aggressive target pulled from thin air. It was the cold math of fixed costs divided by margin. In its entire production run, DeLorean Motor Company built approximately 9,000 cars. It never came close to the number that would have kept the lights on. Cash became the obsession. DeLorean was personally burning through money at a rate that alarmed the few people inside the company who could see the full picture. Allegedly, Funds were being moved between entities in ways that would later attract fraud investigators. The British government, watching its investment deteriorate, began demanding answers. Accountants parachuted into Dunmurry and found a company that wasn't so much being managed as being sustained, week to week, on the next round of financing that DeLorean was always about to close. By late 1981, the company was functionally insolvent. DeLorean was scrambling, and then came the event that would define the public memory of his final chapter far more than any balance sheet. In October 1982, federal agents arrested John DeLorean in a Los Angeles hotel room. On video, the footage showed him examining packages of cocaine and saying words that seemed, at face value, to be the words of a man completing a drug deal. The charge, conspiracy to distribute $55 million worth of cocaine. The theory prosecutors presented was that DeLorean had agreed to participate in a narcotics transaction to generate emergency cash for his dying company. The receivership had already been declared in February 1982. The factory in Belfast had already closed. The workers had already lost their jobs. But now the founder was on television, on tape, apparently holding cocaine and talking about it as if it were a business transaction. The story became a tabloid supernova. 2 years later, in August 1984, a federal jury acquitted John DeLorean of all drug charges. The defense argued entrapment, and it worked. The jury concluded that government informants and FBI agents had induced DeLorean to participate in a transaction he wouldn't have pursued on his own, that the government had manufactured the crime it then prosecuted. The acquittal was complete. In 1986, he was acquitted again, this time of fraud charges related to the alleged misuse of investor funds. The prosecution couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that DeLorean had criminally defrauded the people who had given him money. 2 acquittals, not guilty on all counts. And yet the $175 million was gone. The factory was gone. The 2,000 jobs were gone. The car was gone. Acquittal in a courtroom isn't the same as money returned to the people who lost it. The British government's £77 million of taxpayer money was never recovered. Private investors who had put money into DeLorean's various entities lost the majority of what they had committed. The workers of West Belfast, who had been promised a future, found themselves unemployed again in an economy that had nothing waiting to replace what DeLorean had taken away. DeLorean spent his remaining decades in litigation, in financial trouble of a more ordinary kind, in attempts to revive his name and launch new ventures that never materialized. He died in 2005 at the age of 80. The man who had once been the most celebrated car executive in America died in circumstances that could only be described as reduced. And the car became immortal for a reason that had nothing to do with John DeLorean's vision for it. In 1985, 3 years after the company died, the DeLorean appeared in Back to the Future. The gull-wing doors, the stainless steel body, the look of something from another time entirely, turned out to be perfect for a time machine. The car that failed as a commercial product became an icon as a prop. Today, a used DeLorean in reasonable condition sells for $60,000 to $100,000. The cars that were built are worth more dead than the company was worth alive. There is a pattern in stories like this one, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. The pattern isn't fraud. Exactly. It isn't incompetence. Exactly. It is the gap between the story a founder tells and the numbers that story requires. John DeLorean told a story that was genuinely compelling. He believed parts of it himself. But the math underneath the story never worked, and nobody with the authority to stop him forced him to reconcile the two. The British government needed the story to be true so badly that they didn't look hard enough at the numbers. The investors needed the dream to be real so badly that they moved faster than due diligence allows. When the story and the math finally collided, what died wasn't John DeLorean's freedom. He kept that. What died was $175 million, 2,000 jobs, and the trust of every person who had been told the ethical sports car was coming to save them.